I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Alexandra Vandekamp. I'm the executive director of Gemini Ink. I'm your host tonight, everyone, and I'm kind of representing Blake of Writing Workshops Dallas, which is definitely our collaborating partner on this monthly author series. If I look over, it's because I'm madly letting people in from the waiting room. But we're very thrilled to have Richard Z. Santos is our wonderful featured author with his book Trust Me and his collection of Latinx horror stories. And Daniel Peña, journalist, writer. We actually previously featured him in his great novel Bang as our guest moderator. So I guess I'll kind of get this underway, and I'm just going to be letting people into the chat. So general welcome. Hello. We ask that you stay muted as Richard and Daniel are talking. This is an author talk, so we really enjoy hearing about the writers' lives, their books, and that's a wonderful, rich part of the event. This is a monthly series. It's the third Wednesday of every month. We really love bringing readers and writers together. If you don't know, Gemini Ink is San Antonio's Writing Arts Center, and believe it or not, it's our 30th year. Okay, I'm kind of stunned about that. But we teach the craft of writing to people of all skill levels so they can bring their stories to life. And then we love creating really interesting literary events to bring people in connection to great writers. So that's what tonight's all about. I do have to take a moment and thank our sponsors. Thank you, Humanities Texas, which is allowing us to pay our authors and our moderators at least some kind of fee. We wish it could be more, and just for general support. Also Interbank Books and the Twig Bookstore in San Antonio, UTSA, which helps get the word out, the UTSA libraries, and Lone Star Literary, which does a great job of promoting this. Please use the chat. We love people. Tell us where you're zooming in from. We'd love to hear where you're coming from. You know, share your comments about what you're hearing about these writers, and also post questions you'd like us to ask Richard at the very last 10 minutes of the event. We have a nice audience Q&A. I think that's about it. I'm going to hand this over to David. This event is his brainchild, and he's co-hosting it with me tonight. And he's going to introduce Daniel and Richard. So take it away.
Hello, everyone. Lovely to see you all here tonight. I will be introducing the lovely moderator first, and then our featured writer second. Our moderator tonight is Daniel Peña, who's a Pushcart Prize-winning writer and assistant professor. Formerly, he was based out of the UNAM in Mexico City, where he worked as Fulbright Garcia Robles Scholar, a graduate of Cornell University and a former Picador guest professor in Leipzig, Germany. His writing has appeared in Plowshares, The Rumpus, The Kenyon Review, Texas Monthly, NBC News, and the New York Times Magazine, among other venues. He's currently a regular contributor to The Guardian and Plowshares blog. His novel Bang, which is amazing, is out now from Arte Público Press. He lives in the beautiful Dallas-Fort Worth area. Mm-hmm. And thank you for moderating, Daniel. And now I will introduce our amazing featured writer tonight, whose name is Richard Z. Santos, who's a writer and high school teacher living in Austin. His debut novel, Trust Me, also amazing, was released by Arte Público Press in 2020. He is a board member of the National Book Critics Circle and served as a nonfiction judge for the 2019 Kirkus Prize. He is also an associate editor for American Short Fiction. Before becoming a writer and teacher, Richard lived in Washington, D.C. and worked for some of the nation's top campaigns, political consulting firms, and labor unions. Richard has an MFA from Texas State University and has taught at Texas State, Georgetown University, and the University of the District of Columbia. He is currently seeking representation for his second novel, Every Family is a Conspiracy Theory. Great title. We're so happy to have you guys here, and I guess Alexander, you'll spotlight them. There you go. Take it away, guys.
Yeah. Richard, how are you doing, man?
Hey, Daniel, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for moderating this, and thanks to Gemini Ink and Writing Workshops for having us.
Yes, thanks to all you guys. It's been so long. I mean, we were supposed to have done this like years ago, but this book came out right at the beginning.
Literally 3 years ago, right?
Isn't that wild? Yeah. But yeah, this book is, I feel like it's found its legs though. It's found its way into the world, which is like the magic of books.
Well, I hope so. And I think that, the community of Texas writers is pretty tight. And a lot of people like trying to support other Texas writers. Community of Latino writers is tight. Community of crime writers is right, which this book is kind of in that genre. I do have to say that there's a lot of lightning and thunder rolling into Austin right now. So if there's a flash and I disappear, I will try to rejoin as
Yeah,
quickly
I
as
can juggle and stuff. I'll just put on a juggling act.
yeah.
They just passed through DFW right now, and so I just got internet back, so I sympathize, I guess now a lot. Let's get right into it. I mean, do you have a passage you want to read to us? I mean, speaking about like
Sure.
the intersectionalities of all these things, I'm curious to see what you're going to read tonight.
Yeah, I think it's been a while since I've read from the book, and my go-to is usually the first couple pages of chapter 2, which is when we're introduced to the character Gabe Luna. And I think I'll do that again. I'll probably do like maybe 2 pages or so that we can get into it. It's chapter 2, but it's the first time we're meeting this character, so there's no real introduction necessary. Hell of a week for Gabriel Luna. First, he was fired from a job he hated. Then he discovered his mean bastard of a father gave him bone cancer. Driving a dump truck on San Miguel Pueblo did not pay well, but it did pay. Gabe was helping to build Santa Fe's first major airport, and although the dust gave him headaches and he hated the hours and the heat, he occasionally felt something close to pride in the work. Then a bulldozer dug up a skeleton where there was not supposed to be a skeleton, and the whole site went to shit. A man with shiny shoes climbed onto the bed of a truck and, with shaking hands clasped in front of his mouth, sent everyone home. Gabe and the other laborers were given vague corporate assurances that the site would reopen after a swift investigation into the origin of the artifacts. He wasn't holding his breath. Holding his breath might be better, though, than letting the bone cancer tunnel through his body. The same cancer had worn his father down to nothing but pain and sweat. Gabe would not go out that way. The diagnosis came from Shaman Jeff, whom Gabe called Jefe. Wearing his customary blue Halliburton cap and smoking a cigarette, Jefe had said, "Yep, that's cancer, to the core. Can damn near see it dripping from your nose." Gabe imagined his dying old man spitting bone cancer cells like pollen spores, special delivery, aimed right at the son who was never there. Granted, no actual doctor had diagnosed Gabe. Jeff's diagnosis came after poking a few lymph nodes and lighting a candle, but in 15 years, he had never steered Gabe wrong. The cancer was chewing on Gabe's bones. That was for sure. Cool. I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah. No, I guess so. It's you're such a vivid writer. I mean, one of the things that's been said about this book is it moves at such a fast clip. It's so engrossing. Every time I read this book, I read it in a single sitting almost, unless life happens. But like it's so engrossing. I'm really curious about your process too. Like, do you write, like how what is your process for writing this book in particular, but like other works as well?
Yeah, they're always a little bit different. And that also changes if it's like an essay I'm working on or a short story or something else. But for this book, the process was awful, is really a way to describe it. It started writing it in my MFA program, and so it was published in 2020. I really officially started writing it in my MFA program in like 2010, 2011. I have notes about it from when I lived in Santa Fe back in 2007, but it was really probably a good like 6 years, and not constant, I would put it away for a while, but 6 years of like 30,000 words and just really feeling like I was hitting a runway and just like going.
Yeah.
And then it would just like veer wildly out of control and it would crash. And I fell into the habit of like, okay, I know this isn't working. I know there's like deep like narrative problems, not like, oh, the dialogue needs some work, or like, oh, I don't describe the trees well, but like I knew these were like deep story issues, but I would just keep like grinding and just like it literally like grinding gears of just crawling, it's a couple words at a time,
Wow.
until usually I would show it to someone, or I would just admit it myself and be like, no, okay, fine. And then I would start over. And I would keep a lot, whether that's passages or pages or chapters, or certainly characters, but then I would really need to start over, and I would like have to think about it from a real plot level, like, oh, wait a minute, I need to, so for example, the Gabe character wasn't in my first draft. The first draft was just about Charles, and that wasn't really going anywhere. So I was like, I need the other side of New Mexico here. So I had to introduce Gabe. And then he needed to have more of a plot. He starts like selling weed pretty quickly, but he needed some more motivation for that. God knows how many drafts in, I had to figure that out. I had to give Charles more of a life back in DC. And all of this is just a process of running into problems, denying them,
Yeah.
sometimes just throwing it away, and then going back and trying to fix it.
Yeah, I would have never guessed that about that Gabe was like added in later, because Gabe, for me, was one of the more compelling characters. He feels like so organic to the threads, which are just completely over. I'm thinking of specifically the Olivia thread, Gabe's thread, and Charles's thread, which are, I mean, inextricably interlinked. I think like to great effect. You know, could you talk a little bit about, I guess, like unpack that, like creating these characters? Where do they come from? And I say this knowing that you not dabble, that was your life for a while. You were in politics, you were in labor movements in DC. Yeah.
So so the book, just to give I guess a little bit of that bird's eye view, you know, so before the book begins, we see what happens there. Like they're building an airport for Santa Fe on some tribal land, and they find a skeleton. There's not supposed to be a skeleton. The whole construction project grinds to a halt, and the billionaire land developer who is basically financing the airport, and who had to go through all these hoops just to convince like the tribal organization to sell some land and to allow building on it, like things that like don't really happen very often, if at all, especially in New Mexico. So this rich guy's losing a ton of money. He brings in Charles to just kind of manage PR for the airport. Charles is living in DC, working in politics, but his career is totally over. Right? His previous candidate who was a U.S. Senate candidate. Charles was his campaign manager. That guy goes to prison. Charles almost goes to prison. And so he's really desperate, and he doesn't want to move to New Mexico because he doesn't know why anybody would want to move to New Mexico, but he needs a job, and nobody else is like returning his calls. So he shows up there and soon discovers that there's much more going on than just building an airport, and that there's a lot of money behind what's going on. And he starts to ask himself how he can benefit from all the money that he's realizing is in Santa Fe, which he wasn't expecting. So now to get like back to your question, you know, I knew I wanted to write something set in Santa Fe from basically the first time I went there. I find it to be a very interesting and kind of paradoxical city in a lot of ways. And I knew that I wanted to write something at least informed by my time in politics. And I set out to write actually something closer to like a Jim Thompson novel, where it would basically just turn into like murder from like chapter 3, and it just gets increasingly darker and darker from there. It ended up like becoming much more like a Robert Stone novel. I don't know if anyone's familiar with him, but like someone who's where the threats aren't quite as like in your face as in like a traditional noir novel. So I knew I needed a character to represent that sort of I don't want to say dark side of political work, because that makes it sound too dramatic, but more that just slow accretion of bitterness that happens to, I think, people who are involved in politics too much, whether that's working in it or being an elected official, or even just reading the news for too often. Like we can find that, I think that happens to any of us as just like news consumers. There's only so many like political Twitter accounts you can follow before it starts to really mess with you.
Sure.
And then I knew I'd already been writing some sketches about Gabe because I was like, he's like kind of the real New Mexico, right? He's like my family in New Mexico, that kind of character.
Drives a motorcycle.
Yeah, drives a motorcycle, can't really imagine living anywhere else, doesn't know anybody would want to imagine living anywhere else. And the kind of friction between those worlds. Which also gets into class stuff as well, because Gabe is struggling and Charles is struggling as well, but he thinks he can find a way towards wealth, basically.
Yeah, I mean, this is the interesting thing about this novel, which is, so much of it is about money. I mean, all these characters are sort of tied together by this desire, this drive for money. But at the root, I feel like these characters are in search of like a kind of dignity or like a path out. And it felt more like a commentary on money's role in contemporary politics, like you were saying, but also maybe a meditation on like dignity and what it means to find your way into dignity amidst these systems that kind of like make you sell out, for lack of a better word or something. I was wondering if you had just any thoughts on that as you were like crafting this book. What were the things you were meditating on in terms of like, maybe I want you to unpack this idea of like the way in which it erodes at you. You say you can only follow so many political accounts before it
It just
unravels.
starts to mess with you. Like if you read if in the lead up to an election you're spending too much time on 538 or the New York Times political site, and you're like watching the needle swing back and forth, and like on election night, like that's not a great thing to do.
Yeah.
And much less when you're in it. And
It's like the gamification of like politics. It's like a game. It's like a casino game.
Yeah, and really working in politics, it feels a lot like gambling, or it feels like a lot of any other addiction, because you're, so I lived in Washington, D.C. for 7 years. I was working in politics for 5 of those. And when you work, especially when you're starting off in DC, you're expected to have just a ton of jobs. Like jobs might last for just a special election might only last 4 months. You've got a job for 4 months and then you're fired. Win or lose, you're fired, right?
Yeah.
You hop to a consulting firm for just like that election cycle, and that's like 10 months. And then win or lose, like you're fired. So people jump around. So I worked for a fundraising consultant. I worked for a direct mail consultant, which is like the consultants that send you political junk mail. But those companies are also doing polling for those candidates. They're helping them form strategy. They're helping them form policy. And I worked for a political campaign in Santa Fe. I worked for the AFL-CIO during the first Obama election.
Interesting.
I worked for a political strategy firm that used like historical research and data to help candidates win statewide elections across the country. And so it's a lot. There's a ton of work in a relatively short period of time. And it's exciting. And you see why people get addicted to the campaign life, just long, like 12-hour days with people who all become like best friends and more than friends. And it just becomes this like tunnel vision, right? It's like, we are working to get this thing done, to elect this person, to win this thing. And along the way, you're in Washington, D.C., and you like go to the White House, or you go to like, you see senators and congresspeople on the street. Like you hear secrets, you hear like things.
You got some secrets for us?
I mean, what's funny,
put you on the spot.
I could tell one random story that just really kind of epitomizes this, which is this was my first job with that fundraising consultant. So I'm working in politics for 3 months at this point. I'm actually getting paid, which is better than most people when they get their first job. It's just like experience and like I was saying, the feeling like you're doing something. So I'm working for that fundraising consultant, and we go to a meeting on Capitol Hill, or there's like a fundraiser on Capitol Hill, like somewhere in the neighborhood, so like in somebody's house. And we're walking back to the metro station. It's me, her, and so other person working for her. And we pass DNC national headquarters, which is right by the Capitol building. And it's a fairly nondescript office building next to some train tracks. But they have a club, they have a bar. It's called the Democratic Club, and you have to be a member. You have to either be an elected Democratic official, or a guest of one of those officials, or someone who works for the DNC, or just someone who has access, right?
Yeah.
And we go in, And it is like every cliche of political backroom that everyone is picturing this right now in your head. Whatever you're picturing is right, you know.
Yeah.
Nice wood paneled walls, leather booths that are kind of dim with curtains that can be closed when necessary. Tons of like, you can just tell people are working that room. Tons of drinking happening too. And so like I find myself like at the bar standing next to or my boss introduces me to these two congressmen who are hammered, just absolutely as hammered as can be. And they're doing shots of whiskey, and we do a shot of whiskey, and she tries to explain to them why we're there and what we're doing. And they're just like, they're giving me like a very like, oh, interesting, I'm listening to you face, but they're totally hammered. And I'm just like, wow, you just are snapped into like listening face mode, but you're not, you don't know anything that's happening right now. And then their congressional pagers go off. So like senators and members of the House of Representatives have like pagers for when they're called back to the floor to vote. And their pagers go off and they stand up and they like finish their whiskey, and a few other like people like pop up around the room and they all troop over to the Capitol.
Right in front of the C-SPAN cameras.
Yeah, what they yeah, and then they walk in and they go and they voted on God knows what, and then probably went back out again that night. And like, that's hilarious. That's fun. That's a cool story. Like,
you kind of see how the sausage is made, and it's not exactly inspiring.
It's inspiring for a while because it feels so like cool.
Yeah.
And then you realize that at a certain point, like, yeah, it starts to be a little bit too much into how the sausage is made. And one thing I really realized is that there were a ton of people, you know, great. I don't mean to disparage people working in politics. I think it's still a good thing to do, and it can make you a lot of money as a consultant or other things. But for all of those like wealthy consultants, many of whom are on like CNN or MSNBC tonight, they're not always like happy, right? There's trails of like broken families, and you could just see it when you're talking to them. They're just not in good shape, like physically, mentally, emotionally.
Yeah.
They're so like rich and they're buddies with so-and-so governor, and they like can call up like the president or the president's chief of staff when they like want to, and they have access and they get like cool stuff because of that. But it takes a toll. And so with the character Charles in here, I was really trying to think about what would have happened to me if I had stayed. And you just lose sight, because he just wanted to help, right? He was a liberal dude who wanted to get other liberals elected to make the world better. But slowly it just sort of like changes you.
And then he goes in, he's like, I like his version of selling out is doing PR for like an airport thing. I guess that's what it would be, is like PR is the sellout thing. And then he's hired by a guy, Cody, who says, there's something his friend says something to the effect of like, he will never hire someone who he doesn't think is like morally compromised or something like that, or wouldn't do his bidding kind of thing. Yeah. But he is a fascinating character. But I mean, going back to like the origins of the novel, I'm interested in like, all right, so when do you walk away from this life and decide to, like you, Richard, go into writing? Do you go immediately into the MFA, or are you writing this entire time?
So I most of my life I was always writing, but what that really looked like was having a notebook and jotting down, like, oh, what if an astronaut like fell into and that's it. And I or I start a poem or I start a story. But yeah, so I leave DC in 2010, and so starting in the lead up to that, I start writing more and more. Partly, this is another tangent, but it's partly related to the 2008 Democratic primary. So I was hired by the AFL-CIO to work on their member outreach campaign for that election. And what that usually means is after the New Hampshire primaries or something, like, or just after a little bit into the process, the candidates usually determine pretty quickly.
Altuve got out, and then Bregman hit a home run.
Oh, wonderful.
So I think
I don't know what's going on there. I'm hearing that.
I'm going to watch this.
I think there you go. They just muted themselves. Thank you. So usually like when the head of the ticket gets decided, that's when the AFL-CIO and other organizations can go to work. But in 2008, it took so long because it was Obama and Clinton going back and forth, went basically all the way up to the convention.
Yeah,
And
I
so
remember
I was
that.
hired in January thinking that the job would really start in like February, but it didn't actually start until closer to July. Like there was other stuff we were doing, but I found myself with long stretches of time in like AFL-CIO headquarters where I could write, a story. And then I just slowly started realizing I wanted to try to do it more and more, and then applied to MFA programs, got into one in Texas State in San Marcos.
Nice.
Told
You
people
there
I
with,
was,
like, what, Nelly Rosario was there.
yeah, Nelly was there. I missed Dago Guild by a year.
Oh man, yeah.
Tim
But you see
O'Brien
him
was
around town
there.
and stuff? Because you're in the same city as him, right?
Who, Dago?
Yeah, because he's in Austin, right?
No, I think he was in Victoria for a while.
That's
I-
right.
I'm not sure where he is now, actually.
I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
Man of mystery.
That's true.
But anyway, so you're with Nelly Rosario. Tim O'Brien is also there.
Yeah, Tim was there, and Tim's one of those people who, he wasn't my thesis advisor, but we became friends and he would read some of my work. And so I sent him, God knows, draft. It was fairly late in the process. Let's say it was draft 7 out of 9.
Yeah, yeah.
I knew, I was like, this is done. This is incredible.
Yeah,
I feel so good about this. I'm sending this to Tim O'Brien. That's how good I felt about it. And I sent him, I think, the first like 30,000 words or something. And he sent me back a Word document that made it very clear that I was in fact not done, and that I had a lot of work to do. It was, I think he must have been pushing the limits of like comments and track changes on Microsoft Word. It was like, it was a deep.
It was just like a yeah.
And like his notes would get increasingly angry. It's like, I've already said you keep doing this POV shift or whatever the note was, and I'm not going to make this note anymore. And then 5 pages later, he'd be like, "You're doing it again. This doesn't make sense."
What was he bitching about? What was the note? Do you remember?
I mean, a lot of it was, God. I mean, like because he still teaches there, but less often now, and he'll give you notes on everything
Nice.
from like grammar rules you didn't know existed, to dialogue, to characterization, to plot, to structure. So I think it was kind of a little bit of everything, to be honest. And that
Yeah.
was hard, but like, he wasn't wrong about any of it, and it made that what would be the final draft, better eventually.
I mean, he's such a master of craft. And this is germane to the book because it's in the book. It's in the acknowledgments, but I saw that you had gone to magic shows with him. Or
Yeah.
something.
So,
Like you flew to Las Vegas for like that's in the acknowledge. It's like a whole story in the acknowledgments.
yeah, so Tim and I and another friend of ours who's also a writer named Ross Feeler, we went to a magic conference in Las Vegas. And because Tim O'Brien, I actually wrote an essay about this for the Morning News. If I can find it, I could put it in the chat. But Tim O'Brien stages magic shows in his house, and like they're really like, magic show is too like loose of a term. They're really kind of like spectacles. Like he's very honest about this. He'll talk about this, about how he spent a few years doing this instead of writing.
What? I didn't know that.
Because he would like, the shows would have a plot and they would have a sequence, and he would think really hard about the characters who would be in it and the tricks that he would spend a year and a half mastering. And so he would ask his friends and some occasional MFA students to be in the shows. So
That's cool. So you did a trick?
yeah, so I did this disappearing trick in one, and then a couple other small tricks as like a blackjack dealer.
Yeah. And did you ever have a moment where you're like, man, I left political life, shit? You know, like,
Now
I'm disappearing in a
free time, like playing with magic appearing umbrellas at Tim O'Brien's house. Yeah, it's weird. I mean,
it's cool though.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and it was, I think we all felt, it's just good for writers to have other hobbies, maybe
Totally.
especially other creative hobbies,
Totally. Because
yeah.
when it implodes, and I think it's something that most writers feel at some point in the career that if that's the only thing you're standing on, it can be devastating, Like you got to have that magic thing and you'd be like, at least I got magic. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
There's some
because
escape
with the
hatch.
magic tricks, here I can find this essay. I'll put it in the chat because I haven't thought about this in a while. But like with the magic tricks, like it works or it doesn't, right? Like with your novel, you never know.
Oh yeah, that's the most terrifying part, especially about your debut, which like I think it's cool. I hope other people think it's cool. But what was like, we talked about this briefly, but like what, because this came out in the middle of the pandemic, like
So
the beginning of the pandemic, but like that had to have been just like so incredibly difficult.
So yeah, I think if it came out in the middle of the pandemic, I would have had a totally different experience. But my publication date was March 30th, 2020. So 2 weeks after, almost exactly 2 weeks after everything shuts down, right? That when the NBA shut down and just South by Southwest up here was canceled, it was around March 15th, right in the middle of, or at the tail end of AWP in San Antonio, which is where we met.
Yeah.
And so 2 weeks in, there's not like people haven't started these Zooms yet. Not really, it's just the very beginnings of that. 2 weeks in, nobody has any idea when a vaccine is going to be. 2 weeks in, like the world is still ending, like maybe before the end of summer, right? 9 months in, 10 months in, it's like, oh, there's progress, or like, oh, okay, there's actually things happening here. But I think there's so many of us, and it's not lots of writers, but also certainly like movies and TV shows that got shuffled, musicians, like there's a lot of us whose work came out in that first, like, I don't know, 6 to 8 weeks,
Yeah.
that for pretty valid reasons basically like disappeared.
Yeah.
Which is so, it was so bad in a like universal sense that I couldn't really take it all that personally. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not like Perul Siegel in the New York Times singled me out for a 2,000 word takedown, right? It's not like I said something dumb in some interview and got like canceled online or something. It was just like, yeah, I got screwed, but it wasn't me. Like it wasn't purposeful, right? And so, I think that I just won't have had that normal debut experience, but that also means like, I don't know, like the Austin American Statesman didn't review the book, not that they review many books, but it's also kind of like, well, that's probably fine since they were all working from home for the first time and didn't know what was going on. And I don't know, other things were happening. So that.
Nah, it was an objectively rough time. I remember we were supposed to chat in person at Brazos for the launch, or it was the day after the launch, or something like that. And they canceled. I was really looking forward to it. But I thought about this. I thought about it throughout the pandemic. This book, it kept coming back almost like a recurring trope in my life, because I was like, man, this book is like the perfect book for the post-truth era. Because, and I've told you this before. I mean, there's that line in there about, I'm forgetting which character says it, but it's something to the effect of, it doesn't matter if Geronimo's body is actually the body that was dumped in the back of the pickup. It's that the media believes that Geronimo's body is in the back of the pickup. And I just kept thinking about that as the closer we got to the 2020 election. And I was like, man, I can't believe this book didn't have more resonance, because it's totally about post-truth in many ways. And I was just wondering if there's a kind of absurdism to the skeleton aspect of this novel, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts on like post-truth and writing into post-truth, or whether that was even the intention.
No, absolutely. I'll just give some context for those that haven't read it. So yeah, there's that body, there's skeleton. So not body implies that it's like fresh, right? There's old skeleton found in the construction site. And if there's even a chance that since it's on a pueblo, right? So it has to be treated like very differently. And then basically this group shows up and says, this building is, construction's not going to resume, not just because this is a body, but they claim that that's actually Geronimo's body, that this group of like kind of historically erased like sect or like sub tribe of Apaches like took his body away from Fort Sill in Oklahoma and like reburied him in New Mexico, and then this is the body, which paralyzes this already kind of paralyzed and very panicky and very like paranoid organization. And to me, really Charles's first reaction in the book is also what I hope every reader's reaction is, and his reaction, he's had a few drinks at lunch, is like, this is bullshit. Like, there's no way, right? This is a joke. And it's supposed to be a joke. It's supposed to be that absurd, where it's like, that's just not, no, this doesn't make any sense. Like, Geronimo didn't have a presence in New Mexico. This is just like, it's like, did you just pick like famous Indian name out of a hat? And the point is kind of, yeah. And so nobody really believes it, maybe not even the people saying it, but like you're saying, it doesn't matter, because they have to figure out like where the narrative's going to go. So Charles is like, well, we have to be really careful, because this could be front page news around the world in a few days. You know, I think basically it ends up not being, because ultimately it becomes New Mexico and people don't tend to care about anything that happens in New Mexico.
Yeah.
But they don't know. That could go either way, right?
Yeah.
And that was definitely part of my experience, like in that accumulating disillusionment with like DC and politics in general. You know, like we weren't very far into 2010 when it became very apparent that like Democrats were going to lose a historic amount of seats on the federal and also like local level, as this like Tea Party, this like backlash to Obama really started to build. And it became very clear that that was going to be carried along by Fox News, by other media narratives, and that it wouldn't have mattered. It wouldn't have mattered what Obama had done. Like, he could have gone into a lab and cured cancer himself. Like, he could have like done like absolutely anything, and it wouldn't have mattered. Which is also, and all these pundits on the news are like, well, the year after a president's election, the other party always wins a lot of seats. And it's just like, well, this is just the way it is, just because it's the narrative. And just knowing that it wasn't going to matter, that it wasn't about, there wasn't going to be a message to break through the hearts of like those swing voters, that they were just going to all decide, all those voters in 2008 decided Democrats were the best things ever. In 2010, we're going to decide that Republicans are the best things ever. And then in 2012, they all went back to Obama. In 2014, they went back to Republic. And then, and just knowing that
And
it
it
would
just
just
went-
go like that forever, it's just like, why would I do that? It seems like I'm not even like, we're not even doing anything at this point.
Yeah, I mean, this leads me to like my penultimate question. I do want to ask about the anthology before we open it up to the Q&A. But what you think, I guess it's a bifurcated question. What do you think literature's role is in like a post-truth era? Like, what is fiction's role? Maybe just literature's role in general. And just as a former, like a Politico, like what's going on? I need answers. Like, what is happening? What is tomorrow? How do those things interface? I don't
Sure.
know.
Yeah, I mean, God, those are some big questions, Daniel.
Yeah. See the best for last, the most brain heavy for last.
No, I think it's hard. You know, I have a second novel that I talked about how this book took like 6 years of just painful drafts. My second novel, my first draft came out like 8 weeks or something. I got really solid. You know, I knew it needed a lot of work, but I was like, this is so much better than any of my other drafts of this book. And, you know, but then, you know, life, I set it aside, go back to it, I start working on it. But I've sort of stalled out on that one because so I started writing in like 2016, pre the election. But it's about, it's called Every Family is a Conspiracy Theory, and it's partly about one of the things that happens in the book is the revelation of this like kind of X-Files-esque conspiracy. This sort of like, yep, there is a room with a bunch of dudes and they're deciding who's going to win the Oscars and who's going to be elected president and who's going to win the Super Bowl and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's really a family story, but it's also about the fallout to that. And like the world has become so conspiratorial and paranoid in the years since then that I keep running into like, God, is it even fun to write about conspiracy theories anymore? Like in the era of Trump, in the era of like Joe Rogan and vaccine denials and COVID conspiracies. Like, is this make sense? Like, do I have to talk about these things? I don't want to have to talk about Trump in this novel. It's not a novel about Trump, but like, if I don't mention Trump, isn't that weird? Do I like, how do I deal with COVID? So in a weird sort of way, I feel like my post-truth novel got post-truthed out of like maybe out of relevance. And I mean, we'll see. Ultimately, I just have to finish it and then see what
You never
happens.
know what the future needs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of the political moment, you know, the thing that gives me a glimmer of hope is that it feels like a lot more people aren't falling for the same bullshit anymore.
Yeah.
I think on both sides, and I think that's translated in the past couple of elections to people voting when they might not normally vote, or voting for candidates might not normally vote for. And that gives me some hope, but like, I don't know, man, there's some scary people out there saying some scary things, and a lot of people who just seem to be along for the ride.
Yeah. I think how much of this moment, whether it's, I mean, not to go too far off the rails, but just like QAnon and all that stuff, conspiracy theory stuff, since we're on the topic, is like people just want to belong to like some community. And I thought that was like salient in the book, where you have Gabe, who is really struggling for connection with his son, struggling really had to tell, there's this kind of like a fear and embarrassment of just like what it means to be vulnerable in this world. He's trying to tell his own family members, his ex-wife, he has cancer, and nobody believes him. And there's this real disconnect. You get that same disconnect with Charles and like kind of everybody. But I thought it did a really good job of exploring, and maybe it's a facet that has been talked about the book a lot, but like American loneliness, which is really salient throughout the book. And I'm like, damn, that is something that, I don't know, I would almost wish more reviewers had written into that vein, or had unpacked that vein, because it's so of the moment, you know.
That's
that-
interesting. Yeah. I hadn't thought about it that way, but I mean, there are a lot of scenes where the characters are by themselves, which like narratively was part of my problem with some of those earlier drafts, because you can only have characters like sit and ponder for so long, like they have to start doing things.
Yeah. But it
Yeah.
moved so quick. It was like, even when they were like having a beer in the trailer, I'm thinking of the first scenes where Charles is coming in from the airport. I mean, it moved so quick. It's so well written. I got to say, on a line to line level, it's a real pleasure to read.
You can thank Tim O'Brien for that.
Yeah, he cut you in half, he put you back together, and then you're just a better writer. He built you. Let's talk about really briefly before we open up to the Q&A. The horror anthology. You have a horror anthology. Do you have an arc of it? Yes, there we go. Hold that up.
It's called A Night. So my background. It's called A Night of Screams: Latino Horror Stories. It's edited by me. It's out by Arte Público at the end of this month, so just in like a couple of weeks. I think honestly, if you ordered it now, it'll show up basically tomorrow. But yeah, so this is one of the benefits of working with a small press. Is there's plenty of downsides, but like one of the benefits is that I emailed them like, I don't know, early last year, and was like, what if I do a horror anthology? And they were like, do you want to like find all the writers? And I was like, sure. And they're like, okay, great. And then I just went from there. And so that was fun. So they're all, there's a lot of really great horror work being written out there. And one thing I say in the introduction is that written by like all sorts of writers, right? These are the writers coming of age now, not just in horror, but really in every genre. They're the ones who in high school were reading Stephen King and Garcia Marquez, right?
Yeah.
Reading like Vonnegut and watching The X-Files and reading Dean Koontz and watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer and reading Toni Morrison. And that's leading to a bunch of cool stuff. Is it maybe also leading to our weird superhero like bloat of movies? Maybe, but there's a lot of writers who are writing like really great science fiction and horror and crime novels with those really cool influences, and they don't have to feel weird about it the way that those writers in the 80s or 90s would. And there's like an infrastructure. There's like horror sections. There's horror bookstores, right? There's 2 horror bookstores just open in a 90-mile radius from me here in Austin. And so yeah, I reached out to writers who I knew were already making their name in horror, like V. Castro, who's written quite a few horror novels, and a novelization of about the character from Aliens, Vasquez, the woman, the tough,
Yeah.
she wrote a novelization about her recently. So I reached out to people like her and Andava Cardinal and Lilian Rivera and Leticia Urieta who work with her horror.
Yeah, she's great.
But also some who don't, like Ruben Degollado, who was just on the Penn Faulkner long list or short list.
Nice.
He wrote a zombie story as the first time he did anything like that. And I've got some poets in here writing kind of like horror, or at least, kind of weird fiction sort of stuff. So I think there's some cool stuff in here. And yeah, y'all can get it. Order it.
A night of screams, Latino horror stories. My biggest regret is I didn't send, because you got me right as I was having a kid. By the way, I didn't have enough hours in the day. I kind of still don't. But what I loved, and maybe this is a good segue into like the rest of it. I just want to get your thoughts on this real quick. I mean, you write so well about fatherhood. I love the Gabe scenes in, Gabe and his son and the complicatedness of fatherhood. I just, yeah, that's neither here nor there. I just wanted to just comment on it. Like you're really good at that, and dialogue.
I've found myself in this. So my daughter turns 4 on Saturday.
Nice, congratulations.
Thank you. It seems like I can't write an essay or much of anything without like either building it around her existence or at least mentioning it. And sometimes it's like a personal essay. I wrote a personal essay for Texas Monthly about when my mom passed away in 2020. So it makes sense for me to like talk about my daughter. But even other things, I'm like, oh, this just makes sense for me to mention her in this essay about my soccer fandom or something. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it takes things over, but in a good way.
Yeah. Well, right on. This was such a pleasure. I think we have a few audience Q&A questions. I think I'm going to hand it over back to Alexandra if you're around.
Yeah, no, I am. That was really fascinating. I loved what you said, Richard. What was that? The slow creeping of bitterness?
Yeah.
That was a great
You don't
line.
realize it's happening.
Yeah.
You don't wake up and you're like, oh, now I'm bitter, but I'm rich, so I'm happy. Like it's just
No, it's I just love that comment. And Daniel, your American Loneliness comment has me thinking a lot too. That's a great point. We do have we have a few great questions. I'm gonna and anyone else, if you want to share questions, put them in the chat. We got an amazing 10 minutes to ply Richard with questions on his writing life and more. We have one from Victoria Santos. She says, so many characters in the novel, all written from their own point of views. Did you find a greater attachment to any of the characters? Or maybe even one that was more difficult to channel?
Thank you for the question, Victoria Santos. Yeah, that's a good question. There are not a lot. There's probably 5 point of view characters. That's one thing that changed. I kept adding point of view characters, which is like a really tricky thing, and like can go really wrong because it's like, why are we jumping heads again? Do we really need to do this? But whenever I got to that point where I'm like, oh, okay, I really do need to go into the head of or get a chapter from the evil billionaire's point of view, or the evil billionaire's like henchman, then I think when I got to that point of deciding that, I knew the character well enough to kind of just enjoy it and have fun doing it. I really liked the Malin characters. He's the one who's like the billionaire's like henchman. Those may have been some of my favorite to write, to be honest, because they're the most like my very, very original kind of noir envisioning of what this book could be. Like there's an alternate universe where that's all written in that style, or at least maybe even by that character. Just, a man who is experienced and inflicted violence, but is also just kind of trying to get through his day. Those were a lot of fun. The Olivia chapters were tricky because in draft, not even 1, draft 0.5 or whatever, she was very much a kind of cliched femme fatale thing. And so I had to work really hard to not leave her there. Like I changed the character's name, I changed what she looked like, just all different ways to kind of like shake that off, but it's still the same character. So, so yeah, I think the challenge was blending that point of view with the plot, because I found myself writing a really complicated plot with like who's
Mhm.
keeping secret from who and what day is it, and they have a meeting in 2 days, so
Mhm.
today is what. That became really difficult for me.
I love that. Are you having to like map out the weekly calendars of your characters, Richard?
Oh yeah. Yes, sometimes. I would, um, yeah, I would write out literal calendars.
Wow.
I would do things like make it basically like a graph. So like on one side, I would have the different characters in the order they were introduced. And then that's the y-axis. Along the x-axis, it would have like time. And so like each chapter I could be like, Charles lands in Santa Fe, right? Gabe finds out he has cancer. And then that would help me kind of visualize who knows what, where, who knows who, when have they met, when are they going to do this other thing, um, just to keep it all straight.
I would love to see that graph. That would be kind of a cool visual.
I kept having to rewrite them. Like during revision, I would redo it on purpose to make sure I was still keeping up, that it all made sense. Yeah.
That's cool. You actually we're talking about process, and you have a great process question from Diane Bertrand, great novelist. Richard, what advice do you have for those times when our writing stalls? How do you recapture the impetus to go back and continue drafting?
Yeah, it's hard. It's a great question. It's hard. I mean, I think the whole put it away for not just a day, but a month, 2 months, 3 months, and then come back to it and read it with fresh eyes. Come back to at the point when you're not thinking about it every day, and you're not like kicking yourself like, man, I said I'd get that done by October 1st, and now it's never. When you've when part of your brain has moved on, then pull it out of the desk drawer,
Mhm.
and that gives you some fresh eyes. That's also really hard to do because writers are incredibly impatient, and we tend to think our first drafts are our best and only necessary drafts. Um, I think that getting feedback, find a writing circle, find a friend who's going to tell you your work is bad. If all your friends are telling you your work is brilliant, you're not. You're not brilliant, and they may be your friends, but like you need to find someone who's going to say, I like what you're trying to do here, but and also still show your work to those friends and family members who are going to tell you you're brilliant. That's great. It's great to be told you're brilliant, but also find that person who's going to just be like, but for me, I've heard other writers say this too. Those blocks, like I was talking earlier, of just like, I know this isn't working, but for some reason I keep doing this. Those blocks tend to be there for a reason. I'm a big believer in our brains being smarter than we are. So when
Mhm.
the pen starts to slow down, it's like something in your head is like, you messed up in chapter 2, man. You gotta go back. Or you messed up in chapter -5, something that is in the backstory of these characters. And it's not gonna work. It's not gonna work. And some people can just push it through and then fix it on the revision. I have not had a success doing that. So yeah, sometimes it's about thinking bigger and just admitting those bigger annoying things like, oh yeah, I have to start over, or oh yeah, this character has got to go, or something like that.
Someone's asking where you are, Richard.
Oh, my background. I knew I
Imagine.
had to mention background. So I'm the executive director at Austin Batcave, which is a nonprofit, literary nonprofit here in Austin, very, very similar to Gemini Ink. In basically every aspect. We provide creative writing workshops in Title I schools in Austin and the surrounding area. And we have a small adult program as well. But we have this is our Batmobile. It's a virtual background. This is our mobile library and classroom. And we basically use it now, especially over the summer. We'll take it to events and just give away as many books as possible.
It's great. It's got a very, obviously I think of, it's got a little bit of a Yellow Submarine-ish look to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's supposed to be like an underwater cave.
Can I ask you a question? So because I'm executive director of a nonprofit, and I'm a poet. So the idea of mapping something out with X and Y, like, just leaves me in amazement. Because I think I write like 2-page, maybe 3-page poems. So I'm forever in awe of novelists. But how do you find the time to write your wonderful articles and essays in the Texas Monthly and edit horror stories and do a second novel while being executive director for a nonprofit, or just for all of us busy people out there? Any suggestions for how to keep writing going?
It's hard. It's really hard. The most common advice, which I don't do, but I do think is the best advice, is the whole like get up an hour before everyone else, just get done what you can get done. That's so easy to say, but for some people that just makes them miserable. And like you can't wake up at 4:30 every day for the rest of your life. You just but it is good advice. And when I stretches of time where I've managed to do that, you can be really productive. When I was a teacher, I would basically only write over breaks. So like 4 days off or a week off for Thanksgiving or whatever. Great, I can use 4 of those to write before I go home. That's harder to do, obviously, in a regular day job, but take those vacation days. Take yourself away. I'm a big fan of like taking myself on like weird, like 1 day, maybe 2 day writing retreats at like La Quinta or something. Like I had an essay due for Texas Monthly. It was due last month, and I was just like, I like talked to my wife, and I was like, I think I need to go to a hotel for the night and just write this. And she's like, okay. And that's what I did. And I needed to get that far away from things. I think that makes a huge difference.
That's great advice. Yeah. Well, anyone have any last questions? Daniel, great questions. Great author talk. I have put in the chat a link to our survey. It's brief, but we'd love to hear from you. Find out what you loved about tonight, suggestions for future events. It's also great to find out who we're serving, because then we can know who we're serving and who maybe we're not yet serving. So I know we're in a survey world and you're probably tired of surveys, but this is a really friendly short one. And then it was just so great having you, Daniel and Richard. I just loved hearing about your writing process and your worlds. I hope you don't get poured on and get hit with thunder, Richard.
Team match that starts at 8:30, but it's not going to be starting at 8:30. So
yeah, no, the radar is looking kind of colorful in San Antonio. But everyone, this is the Big Texas Author Talk. We are here the third Wednesday of every month. So join us in July. We have Jeanne Dubrow, who's a poet and also a nonfiction essayist, and she's this great book called Taste, a Book in Small Bites, and it's all about the sense of taste. So I think that's going to be fascinating as well. And Richard, just good luck. You got to let us know when you place that second book, and we'll just bring you right back on. You know. So everyone have a great time. Thanks, Danielle. It was great seeing you again.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Richard.
It
was awesome. We loved it.
I was able to sit back and just enjoy that whole conversation. So be safe, everyone, and we will see you soon. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on your bus, Richard. I'm so glad we got to do this. This is awesome.
Yeah, let's do it in person soon.
Oh, hell yeah. All right.
I'll be in touch.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, Richard. Thanks, Daniel. Yeah.
Bye.